Welcome back to Audio 101. In this week's class, we'll cover the following topics. Basic editing, including trimming, fades, and crossfades. Automation of track, plugin, and MIDI data. Basic sound for picture techniques, including spotting effects visually and with timecode, adjusting volume levels, and panning. And an overview of timecode and synchronization. First up are some basic editing techniques.
This is a demo of some of the basic audio editing features in Pro Tools. We have a file up to work with here that's apropos. Basic audio editing. So working with that, we'll start with some of the tools. We have a zoom tool, which allows you to work like a magnifying glass and go in at high resolution into your files to work with them. Double click on it to bring it back out. And next is a trim tool, which allows you to trim from either end of the region. Play with it. Basic audio editing. So we'll change that from we have to back to music. Back to basic audio editing rather than sick audio editing. Drag those back out. This is a selection tool that allows you to also start playback from audio editing wherever the cursor is, and you can also highlight an area like the word audio and go under the edit menu and separate a region, Command E, and now I've created 3 regions out of this one region. And if I use the grabber tool, which is the hand, I can move these around. And then playback will sound like this. Basic audio editing. Okay, and I'll undo all that. So they're now back to being one single region. The scrubber tool is like a playback head that allows you to drag or, in a sense, scrub over the audio and play it back this way. Audio editing. Editing. And the speed or slowness of how the audio is played back depends upon how slow you scrub the little speaker icon over. Next is a pencil tool, which is used when especially when you're at very high resolution, allows you to actually draw into the audio waveform, which is extremely useful if you needed to clean up pops or clicks or stuff like that, but you're literally drawing into the waveform. It's a powerful tool. It's easy to make unpleasant artifacts, so you definitely want to use that sparingly. I'm going to undo that. So that's the basic tools here. And I'm going to mute this track, open up another track, and here we have a little drum beat. And I'll create a fade, just highlight the first part of that track, and that would be Command F to bring up fades, but I'll do under Edit menu to fades and create. And you have a number of different kinds of shapes you can create, and S-curves, but I'll just go with a straight line here for the moment. And these fade files are actually separate files that are created, so this doesn't write over your original file. This is another file that it creates, which is the fade file. And you can remove these fades by just double-clicking on them and then deleting them. It's not deleting your region, it's just deleting that fade that replaced that part of it. So now we're back to normal. And this is an example here I'll make of a crossfade. I've got 2 regions that I'm going to overlap and kind of butt up against each other, and so suddenly you have a very abrupt change into a guitar sound. So I can highlight the transition here, and if I have enough overlapping space in the region, I can create a crossfade where this side fades out as this side fades in. And I'll show that graphically in the fades window again. Let's Command F or go down here. And you can kind of see it overlay over that. And again, you have different shapes of fades and such like that. So now you have a much less abrupt change. Much nicer. So that's a quick overview of some of the basic editing functions in Pro Tools.
There's a really helpful analogy to think about when we discuss automation. In the same way we have keyframes in a timeline-based application like After Effects, we have automation points in many audio editing programs. Automation points represent a change to the state of a parameter of an audio or MIDI file. Depending on which software you're using, different parameters will be capable of being automated. Common parameters to automate would be volume level, stereo or surround panning, and muting. Many plugins allow most or all of their controls to be automated. There are three main ways for adding automation to your audio project. The first of these is to use envelope points. Envelope points are added to envelopes along the timeline, an envelope usually being depicted as a horizontal line that runs across your project. You can add automation points by double-clicking with your mouse. You can also edit existing automation data by dragging the position of these points. The second method for creating automation data would involve changes you make to controls within the user interface of your digital audio program. And this would include changing the value of a fader or a knob, or clicking on or off a switch on a plugin, changing the values on a plugin. And assuming you had those parameters in write mode, then those changes would be recorded and playback the next time that you start audio playback. So you could think of automation as just a record or a representation of each of the mouse moves you make to adjust your mix or your track. The third method is to use a supported control surface, and you can record automation data by physically moving the faders, knobs, pressing buttons, or using other controls on the control surface. These controls are mapped to equivalent functions in your digital audio software. This is a good time to introduce the different modes for recording automation. In general, there are 3 different modes for looking at automation. There's write, touch, and latch. And then there's the additional read, which just allows you to use the existing automation data so that it will be active when you're playing your audio files. And then you have touch mode. In touch mode, any movements you make will be recorded and will override any existing data. And that will continue to happen until you release the control. When you do release that control and you're in touch mode, the control will return to the value it was at previously before you started recording the automation. And the difference between that and latch mode is that in latch mode you also have your movements being recorded, and they'll also overwrite whatever might have been there previously. But the difference with latch mode is that the control will stay where you leave it when you're done, when you let go of the control. In the following demo, we'll show a few different types of automation. In Soundtrack Pro, you can have many different types of automation on screen at the same time. So for this little piece, we'll just play a little bit of it. And then we'll bring up some of the automation, the envelopes for the automation. And here you have on screen volume and pan. And we'll go ahead and click with the mouse to add some volume points onto the envelope here. And then we can use the mouse to adjust them up or down. And we'll go ahead and play. So now when the performance plays back, you can see how it's going there, and then we can adjust the points. We can also adjust several points at once as a group by shift clicking, shift selecting them. And we can also use the slider to adjust the point and all the points after. We can automate plugin parameters too, so we'll enable this reverb plugin and then enable the wet dry mix to be automated. And then we'll go ahead and play the track. Using the slider, we'll increase the wet mix to the dry mix. And then we'll play it back. And you can see the automation that was written in from the plugin. Just a very simple example. We have a file open in Pro Tools to demonstrate some of the automation modes. So here they all are: read, touch, latch, and write. So we'll put this into touch mode and play the file, and we'll use our control surface to, I'm moving the fader here. I did a volume down and then a volume up. Since we were in touch mode, it jumped back to the 0 value after I let go of the control. Now we'll switch to latch mode. And so after I move the controller, the value will stay at the point where I left the control. Lastly, I can use write mode to overwrite the automation data with the current value of the fader. Up to this point, we've been talking about an automation that would be called track automation. There's another type of automation called MIDI automation. It does not deal with audio files, but rather deals with MIDI data. So David will be up next to give us an overview of MIDI and MIDI automation.
MIDI is a standard agreed upon in the early 1980s as a means by which electronic musical instruments from different manufacturers could talk to each other using streams of hexadecimal information. When you play a MIDI keyboard or other MIDI controller, you can trigger notes played on synthesizers or other sound-creating devices connected via MIDI cables, or record and playback performances using a computer MIDI sequencer such as Logic Pro. MIDI is only control information. It contains no audio signals. It is data that contains note numbers, lengths of notes, pressure by which keyboard keys are pressed, volume and panning information, settings and sound changes, and many other control messages. MIDI controllers generally have settings ranges from 0 to 127. Along with MIDI keyboards, you can also send controller information using MIDI interfaces with knobs, slider controls, buttons, and many other methods. In this demo, I'll show you some of the MIDI editing and automation features in Logic Pro. What I have here is a MIDI file of some piano music, and as you can see, it looks akin to a punch card, and the longer notes are shown as longer little bars here. It's a linear thing that goes from left to right. And there's several different ways to view this information in more detail. The first one is a player piano roll, and that's actually, the piano roll is a good analogy for this because, in a sense, this is a player piano roll. And here's some player piano music to go with it. And I hate to turn off the Scott Joplin there, but have to move on. First off, you can see that the notes here are in different colors, and that is because what the colors are showing is the velocity at which the notes are played. And if you were playing on a normal piano, If you struck a key very hard, you would get a loud sound, and if you played the key very lightly, you would get a very quiet sound. And so the colors are showing that. And one way to show you what that does is go to these tools. Right here you have two tools immediately at your disposal. There's the left click tool, which would be your normal click, and then a command click tool. And here I have the velocity tool already picked. So when I command click, I get a V next to my cursor, and that allows me to drag up and down on highlighted notes that have been highlighted like that. And when I do that, you'll see that the color changes of the note and the volume goes up and down. So purple would be the quietest, up through blue, through green, through yellow, through red. So now we have a very loud note here. And another way to change MIDI data is to change the length of it. So this would be a very short note. And another way to change this data is to change the note itself, and that would be dragging it up and down or lower for higher notes. So, of course, this isn't going to sound right. So we'll put it back where it's supposed to be. And, of course, another one is to change it in its relationship to time. So that's a group of ways to edit MIDI data when it's in piano roll mode. Other ways to view MIDI data are the score window, which shows it like it would be a piece of piano music. And another one, which is much more detailed, is the event list, which is showing very detailed per note information of the MIDI data, which is beyond the scope of this demo, but it's detailed, much more detailed MIDI information as it's playing. And I'm going to jump now to the hyper editor. Now the hyper editor is already showing here the note velocities, which we talked about before, as being shown in the piano roll as colors. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the Command Shift tool here, which is a pencil, and draw in volume automation here in the volume bar. I'm just going to do this by just dragging it and moving it up and down. As you can see, the number next to the word volume is changing because MIDI information of continuous controllers can go between 0 and 127. So now I'm dragging it back to 0. And now I'll play it, and we have automation of the volume of this piece of music. And you can also see that the automation is reflected in this window, and I'll stretch this out so you can see it in better detail. So you can see the bars here that are showing that, and other kinds of automation will show up here as well if you put it into there. So that's just a couple basic MIDI automation features in Logic. This is a basic sound for picture demo using Soundtrack Pro. What I have already brought in is a video clip of Chicago City. You'll see it's a silent clip. It pans down, and you see some cars, see a couple walking down the sidewalk, and there's a park. And also you noticed it looped, and that's using the looping feature, which I'm going to turn off here. And as the track didn't have a soundtrack, it's silent obviously, but it still made the video track, once I imported it, created a empty track for its soundtrack, which of course there was none, but it will automatically do that. And for simplicity's sake, I'm going to remove that track because we're not using it. So what I'm going to do is bring in some sounds and create a soundtrack for this clip. And I've already created a couple favorites here to use, but you can also search through a very large library of sounds that come with the Soundtrack Pro software, and you can also browse through your computer. But in this case, I'm going to save a bunch of time, and I've already made favorites, but you can find those files in many different ways. And I've already obviously imported the video, so I'll start bringing in some sounds. And also the enter return key brings you to the beginning of your sound file, and you can use your arrow left and right keys to scroll through the scene as well. So the first thing I'm going to bring in is a city ambient sound, and when you click on them, you'll be able to audition these sounds. This sound here. And I thought that was a useful sound because it sounds like a city, but it also has birds and a park in it. So bring that up and you just drag it right onto the clip there. And you can control the volume through these sliders, and then there's also a more detailed set of envelopes here, and you can bring up a whole bunch of stuff, but these rest of this isn't really applicable for this demo other than the volume and pan, which are here, shown as here, and you can draw envelopes into here, but for the moment we'll just use the simple volume envelope, and we'll play the scene now. So I think that sets the scene pretty good, and we'll go on to the next thing. I'm going to bring in a automobile that will be the first car, the taxi that drives. That's what happens when you do it that way. I'll use my arrow keys. As you can see, there's a taxi that kind of shoots by about halfway through the clip. So I'm going to bring in a sound for that, which is a loud sound, so you'd already know I'm going to turn that down a bit. Bring it in right about there. And let's see how, turn the volume down a bit, and let's see how that works. That's not bad. Next, I'll bring in another car sound for the next car that shoots by right up to the end of the clip. That's going to be this mid-sized car. And I'm going to bring that in just a little bit after the other clip. Right about there. As you can see, that kind of just ends right. Got the, as you can see, the real, louder part of the sound file is all the way up here, which is kind of right at the end of the sound file, which is right where that car kind of shoots past you here. You hear that? Again, we have a very loud sound, so I'm going to turn that down quite a bit. Hear that again. That's good. Still a little loud. So I'm going to bring this down. Also, just a real quick overview. This is what's going to, control how much of the time you see at one time, in greater detail or short detail. I'm just going to set that by the length of the clip, which is all we're going to be working on here. And now I'm going to bring in some footstep sounds, which would be for the couple that walks by. You see they kind of enter in, and depending on your directorial style, you may want to not have the sound start until you actually see the couple, or maybe start the sound a little before you see them, so that you've already sort of set the scene. There's some walking, and these are footsteps on hard concrete. A little bit of room ambience in them, but I think they'll be fine for this. And I'm going to drop them in just right about here, right before you see the couple. Let's see how that looks. That kind of works. Also, you can use these mute and solo buttons. In this case, I'm going to mute all of these just to hear the footsteps by themselves. And kind of times pretty good with the couple. And then I'm going to bring in another set of footsteps that has a little bit of a scuff in it, a little more random sounding. And that'll kind of add a little bit more of a group element and not sound as perfect as the other ones. As you can see right now, everything's snapping, and I can turn off the snapping, so I can kind of slide this a little bit out of the way, so you can kind of see these footsteps here aren't completely lining up, which will sound more like two people walking together. See how that sounds? I can see that working. And now when you go into your envelopes here, you can create a little bit of a pan, because these people kind of start here in the middle and kind of move over to your left. So let's say right about here, they're going to be in the middle, and you double click on these to create these markers, and then make one for, I'm going to turn back on my snapping here, make one for the end of the clip and pan it far left, and do the same for the other. It's a subtle effect, but it might add a little bit of realism. And they're also a little loud, so I'm going to turn them both down a little bit. And close those up. As you can see, I clicked on one of these, and you can create new sounds for, you can create new titles for these if you want. And then last but not least, I'm going to bring in a little bit of music. This is from my own collection. This is not from the Soundtrack Pro library. Again, it's loud, so I'm going to bring it in, but then I'm going to turn it down quite a bit. And this is just to kind of set the scene at the beginning. So I'm going to open up the envelope again and create a volume handle right there, and just bring it down a bit so you just kind of hear it at the beginning. Oh, snaps on again. So you just kind of hear it at the beginning, but not too much after that. Just kind of sets the scene. So let's start from the top here and hear how that sounds. Okay, forgot to unmute everything. And this will be the completed scene. The one other thing I'm going to do real quick is put the snaps back on, and this is the master track, and this is master volume for everything, and I'm just going to create a little envelope just at the end of the scene so that it doesn't end so abruptly. So you just have a little volume fade right in the last, part of a second there, just so it sounds a little less abrupt.
Our next topics are synchronization and timecode. Though an audio mix can certainly be produced in audio software without reference to other pieces of equipment or other video or audio sources, this is not the case when you need multiple sources working together. In order for this to happen, we need synchronization or sync so that all our sources will play in time with one another. And we also need to have a standard reference called timecode. The main type of timecode data we deal with is SMPTE, and SMPTE timecode is a type of metadata for labeling frames of video. SMPTE timecode is used as a timing and sync reference for video and audio. There are a few different ways of representing SMPTE timecode, and I'll mention two of those here. The first is linear or longitudinal timecode. This is SMPTE timecode data encoded as an audio signal. Normally that would be recorded on one channel of a videotape, for example, and that's called striping. Another way to encode SMPTE timecode is to use MIDI timecode, abbreviated MTC. MIDI timecode works by transmitting the timecode information in MIDI messages. And the reason drop frame timecode came about was because there was an issue that happened when color NTSC video was invented. There was a need to maintain compatibility with black and white TVs, so the engineers had to strive for the color TV channels to occupy the same bandwidth as the black and white channels had. There was an unfortunate byproduct of these efforts, and they had to correct this by increasing the field period by 0.1%. And this resulted in a frame rate that was not a whole number, 29.97. In order for this crazy frame rate to work and to match up to a real clock, they had to bring drop frame into the equation. And when we refer to drop frames, it's not actually dropping frames of video. Instead, it's skipping counting certain frame numbers. So timecode running at 29.97 frames per second will keep up with the actual clock. The way it works is drop frame skips counting frames 0 and 1 in the first second of every minute. But they found out with this that it would overcompensate for the timing error. So no frame numbers are skipped during minutes that are divisible by 10. So that would be in minute number 10, 20, 30, 40, etc. There's no skipping of frame numbers that happens during those minutes. Here's a quick rundown of some of the frame rates you'll encounter when you're working with audio and video. 23.976, which is sometimes rounded to 23.98, 24, 25, and 29.97. Earlier in the class, we saw how to place sound effects and other pieces of audio visually, and now we'll look at how to do that using timecode. These little demos of spotting sound effects to timecode are really rough. If we were doing an actual project, we'd definitely want to be more precise and pay a little more attention to detail. So the first method in Soundtrack Pro for spotting a sound effect with timecode would be to place your playhead where your audio cue is going to occur, and then right-click on the sound effect and say Spot to Playhead, and then you're good to go. Let's say we knew the timecode number of where we want the sound effect to start. Then we could just go ahead and select the sound effect in the search window, the library window. Right-click it and say Spot to Timeline. And then after that, type in the timecode number. And the beginning of the sound effect will snap to that timecode number. Pro Tools has a similar facility both for spotting sound effects and for doing different operations like trims. It's called spot mode. So basically anything you do in that mode, you're typing in timecode values rather than just dragging your mouse. In Class 4, we'll talk about audio project and file management, the workflow between audio and video applications, audio file formats, and more about using plugins. Thank you for watching and for signing up for this course. Be sure to ask any questions you might have in the forums. Until then, we look forward to talking to you next week.